So in the second part of the activity for today, what we'll take a look at is how we can now graph by hand these parabolas that have some number that we're multiplying by in front of the x squared. Hopefully you've completed the investigation and have some ideas from Desmos about what's happening and what this will look like. What we should see is that whenever we multiply by some number out front, that does not change the vertex from our base parabola. So we have our vertex that will be at 0, 0. Whenever we are multiplying by a positive number, like we are in part 1 and part 2, we will see that the parabola continues to open up. But what we should have seen is that as we multiply by some number, it looks like it takes this parabola and it starts to make it look really skinny, so it brings those sides in. In the investigation, what I wanted you to take a look at is what happens to that y pattern. So normally what I do here is I would write out, well, in our base parabola, our y pattern would continue to be 1, 4, 9, 16, and so on and so on. The new y pattern, what we should see, is that when we have this multiplier of 3, what it actually did is it takes our base y pattern and it multiplies this by 3. So our new y pattern would now be 3 times 1, 3 times 4, 3 times 9, and 3 times 16, and so on and so on. Now, we can see when we do that some of these numbers are going to get way too big to graph, and that's fine. We'll just plot as many as we possibly can. So to graph this, we now have our vertex at 0, 0. And then we still use this same idea, but this 3 now has stretched the graph out, or it made it look really skinny. So what we do is we use this new y pattern. So if I come over 1, now we go up 3 instead of only going up 1. If I go back to my vertex, if I go over 2 spaces, we're now going to go up 12 instead of only going up 4. So there's 5, 10, 11, 12. There is that next point. And by the time we get to our third point, if we go 3 spaces over, I would have to go up 27, which is now way too big to fit on our graph. So we are done plotting points. What we can do now is, by symmetry, do the exact same pattern on the left side. That if we come over 1, we go up 3, and if I come over 2 spaces, we're going to go up 12. So there is our new points to graph our parabola. Sometimes when they get skinny, these are a little bit tricky to graph. You do the best you can to draw this really skinny looking parabola. Okay, and there's our graph. We call this a stretch because I think of this kind of like an elastic band, that if you were to take an elastic band and you were to pull it, what you would see is that the sides of that elastic band would get really narrow like this here. And that's essentially what we're doing to our parabola. We're pulling that like an elastic band, our base one, and we're pulling it this way so that those sides come in and get really, really skinny. The second one, we change the name slightly, although we apply this the exact same way. We call it a vertical compress. And we're going to see we call this a compress or a compression because now we're multiplying by some number that's smaller than 1. Again, whenever we have this multiplier, that will not change our vertex, so that will still be at 0, 0. Because that number we are multiplying by is a positive number, this will still continue to open up. In our base parabola, we have our y pattern 1, 4, 9, 16, and so on and so on. So our new y pattern, and this is where we apply this the exact same way we did in our last question. We take this 0.25 and we are going to multiply. Now, if you need to use your calculator to do that, that's fine. If I take 1 and I multiply it by 0.25, I would get 0.25. If I take 4 and I multiply it by 0.25, I would get 1. If I take 9 and I multiply it by 0.25, I will get 2.25. And if I take 16 and I multiply it by 0.25, I will get 4. So there are our new y pattern values. To graph this, again, we start at the vertex, 0, 0. And now this tells me my pattern. If I come over 1, I got to go up 0.25. Because this is such a small decimal, all we do is just try to plot that as best we can, saying there's about 0.25. If I come over now 2 spaces, I'm going to go up 1. If I come over 3 spaces, I'm going to go up 2.25. So there's 2.25. And if I come over 4 spaces, I'm now going to go up 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. If we copy those points onto the other side, we use the exact same y values here. Over 3 was up 2.25, and over 4 was up 4. What we should see is that we start to get a parabola that looks like it's really starting to flatten out. So if I graph those two sides, there it is. Again, we call this a compression because what we're doing is we're taking that parabola and it's like we're squishing this down this way here. And as we squish that down like an elastic band, as we squish it down, it's actually going to open that parabola and make it wider. Last one, we're going to add in one more piece. We call this a reflection. The big piece here is that we are now multiplying by a negative number. Okay, we should have still seen in the investigation that the vertex does not change. However, as soon as we multiply by that negative number, okay, that is going to now make this parabola open down. We still apply this in the exact same way. So for the y pattern, I say, well, my base y pattern and my base parabola is still this 1, 4, 9, and 16. For my new parabola, we're going to take this value of negative 2 and we are going to multiply. So we still apply this the same way we did in the previous two, other than now we are multiplying by a negative number. So as I do that, I'm going to get now negative 2, negative 8, negative 18, and negative 32. So we plot this. We start with our vertex, which is right here at the origin. When we come over 1 now, this is telling us that our new pattern here is negative 2. The negative is now telling us that we go down instead of going up. If I come over 2 spaces, it tells us that we're at negative 8. So negative 5, 6, 7, 8. And then if I come over 3 spaces, we're at negative 18. So 1, 2, 3, there's negative 5, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. If we want to try and put something, we're right here, almost off my page. Okay, negative 32 won't fit. So we copy this pattern on the left side. So over 1 is down 2. Over 2 spaces is now down 8. And over 3 spaces is now down 18. Again, someplace that's almost off my page, someplace down here. If you have points that don't fit on the page, you don't have to plot them. We could have stopped at that point there. I was just putting that so we have an idea about where we are heading with this graph. Lastly then, we connect the dots. And again, as these get skinny, they sometimes get a little bit tricky to graph. So come around, hit those points, and there it is. So really 3 things, they are all dealing with this number that we're multiplying by. If I multiply by a number that's bigger than 1, we get a stretch and it gets really skinny. If I multiply by a number that's smaller than 1, we get a compression and it gets really wide. And if I multiply by a number that's negative, it actually flips this parabola upside down so that it now opens down. But we apply all 3 of these in the exact same way. All we do is take what that number is that we're multiplying by, and we take our original y pattern for our base parabola and we just multiply it by that new number. And that will create this new y pattern that we can now use to graph our parabola. Hope that helps. Again, send me an email if you're having questions. If not, there's an assignment there for you to try.